Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. This is Dr. Hebatallah Adam from Jindal School of International Affairs. I will start briefly introducing myself to our participant. I am Assistant Professor of Economics and the Assistant Dean of Academic Affairs for the Master Program in JSIA and the Executive Director of Jindal Centre for the Global South. I am delighted today to be with you and moderate this panel discussion on women empowerment, MSMEs, and the Global South. So, of course, you know that ensuring that women have equal access to education, employment, and entrepreneurship is considered to be critical to achieve a stronger, more sustainable and inclusive growth. The economic empowerment of women in Southern countries plays a fundamental role in building more cohesive societies. So the main goal of our today's session is to explain the importance of women empowerment to inclusive growth and how it can be fostered through cooperation amongst countries of the Global South by bringing about positive social change such as gender equality, poverty reduction, economic growth, elimination of discrimination, and socio-economic improvements. So therefore, we have invited for our today's panel discussion a group of experts in the field that I would like at first to start introducing them briefly to you. So at the start, I would like to introduce Professor Anuradha Chenoy. She is the former Dean of the School of International Studies in Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi. She has been the chairperson of Area Studies Director in the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies. She has written many books, monographs, and articles in the domain of security studies, development studies, and gender studies as well. She has held short-term consultancies with the International Committee of the Red Cross, UNESCO, Action Aid International, United Nations Women, United Nations Peacekeepers. She has also evaluated the work of organizations like Focus on the Global South and the Asia-Europe People Forum. So we are really greatly honored to have Professor Chenoy with us today. Our second eminent guest speaker for today is Professor Angela LYONS. She is professor and director for the Center of Economic and Financial Education in University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in the United States. She is widely recognized as an international expert in household finance and behavioral economics. Her research focuses on emerging issues related to economic and financial inclusion, financial and digital literacy, poverty and inequality, and the economic empowerment and protection of vulnerable population. Today, Dr. LYONS has assisted over 40 countries in designing practical and sustainable models to improve the economic and financial resilience of communities worldwide. Dr. LYONS is as well a member of the T20, which guides policy innovations to help G20 leaders to address pressing global challenges and create more inclusive, sustainable and resilient societies. So thank you, Dr. Angela, for being with us today. It is a great honor. Of course, at last not least, our honorable guest speaker from Egypt, Professor Ashraf Sheta. He is visiting assistant professor for entrepreneurship, management and innovation at the American University in Cairo. Professor Sheta is also working as freelance trainer and consultant in the fields of planning, family business, strategic management, innovation, as well as entrepreneurship and small business management. Professor Ashraf has worked with many prominent organizations in the field of training and consultancy like the European Union, USAID and International Labour Organization and the International Organization of Migration. So we are really delighted and honored to have Professor Ashraf with us today. So I really would like to express at first, before starting, my gratitude to the three panelists for accepting my invitation and to make their time to be with us today. As we are having a short time for our panel, it is supposed to take around 1 hour. So we are going to break this into two distinct parts. At first, we are going to start by the presentations that our eminent panelists are going to give. And each panelist is going to have around 15 minutes. And then we'll end with the Q&A section and finalize our session. So I request, please, all attendees to prepare their questions and write in the chat box, starting by the name of the panelists that they would like to address their question to, or write down that it is a general question if it is not precise to a specific one. So let's start at first by Professor Anuradha Chenoy. Professor Anuradha is going to share with us her expert opinion on a very important topic, why women and MSMEs matter in South-South cooperation. Professor Chenoy.
Thank you, Dr. Adam, colleagues, students, co-panelists, members of the Jindal Institute for Behavioral Sciences and the Jindal Institute for Leadership and Development and Executive Education. I'm deeply honored to be on this panel, and I will speak on why women and MSMEs matter in South-South cooperation. Now, for the sake of time, I will begin with some of my conclusions and then go backwards into my presentation. So my conclusions are: one, that women matter, and they matter even more when they lead. The gender issue has been integral in development policies. And if you look at the research and active policy analysis, whether it's of the UNDP, the Human Development Reports, the Gender Development Index, you have concrete evidence which shows that there is a correlation between a higher gender development index and a higher human development index. And GDP of any country also rises and when the gender gap reduces. It is with this in view that the Sustainable Development Goals are committed to gender equality, and almost all countries in the world have committed to improve gender equality. Second, my second conclusion is that studies world over show that micro, small, and medium enterprises, the MSMEs, they play a significant role in national economic development of any country, but more so in the global south. They provide employment, encourage creative solutions, they fuel the economy. Furthermore, women-led MSMEs are particularly significant, but they need support. They need support of governments, civil society, policymakers. Third conclusion is that since countries of the global south have become donors of development assistance, earlier they were just receivers, the very narrative of foreign aid and development assistance, especially between countries of the south, has changed. And fourth, much more needs to be done to combine these three components of women, MSMEs, and development assistance, or foreign aid, however you call it, paradigms within South-South cooperation. So now, even as countries of the South have headed in different directions in their post-colonial trajectories and have wide differences in terms of size, demographies, political and economic systems, etc., they share commonalities of a colonized past, an unequal share and place in the global political economy, as receivers of hegemonic and interventionist politics and economics. But countries of the South, of the global South, have over the last several decades tried multiple strategies to better their lot and be part of different development paradigms and policies. These include, for example, coming together as part of the non-aligned movement, yet others linking as part of military alliances and great powers, searching for South-South collective strategies, especially since the 1970s and 80s. And in the last 2 decades, much of the global South joined the whole guidelines of globalization, the Globalization Pact, guided by multilateral agencies to seek more foreign FDI, foreign domestic investment, technology transfers, increase their trade, even if it remained extractive. Now, in all these endeavors, it became clear that some countries gained from globalization, that is, countries from the South, while others continued to face major issues of inequalities, of conflict, and could not fulfill the aspirations of their people. In this change, even countries that gained because of globalization, became manufacturing hubs, they developed a more powerful elite. Many of them developed oligarchy, and in most cases were linked to international finance capital, while the already marginalized communities like women, minorities, they remain at the lower rungs of the trickle-down ladder. But many governments, like in India, for example, continue to unfold a lot of schemes, both for development assistance and for women, in order to improve their position in society, but they continue to face a large number of challenges. Now, countries of the South experimented with polycentric alliances like the BRICS, for example. Of course, Russia was not part of the global South, but they were part of BRICS. Then there was the SCO, there's the ASEAN. And one of the more interesting and innovative methods of assistance that came about was a new form of development policies which tried to transmit the experiences of the comparatively richer southern countries like India and China, Brazil, in the form of development assistance. Now, this development assistance from these countries, which call themselves the BRICS, but even others like Korea and even Indonesia, is marked out for its difference from the traditional donors of Western foreign aid, because that was often seen as a new form of extractivism or neocolonialism, it was called different things, and intervention in sovereignty issues. It was seen as too interventionist. But the development assistance which came from this global South, especially from India and Korea and others, was crafted within a South-South framework. So it was based on solidarity, a narrative of solidarity, of non-interference, of mutual benefit, of no conditionality, except South Africa had conditionalities. It was recipient driven because India often said, we'll give the kind of assistance you want. You ask for it, so it won't be donor driven, but recipient driven. It would be very largely knowledge sharing, training. It would be a transfer of technology. There would be financial and monetary cooperation, including lines of credit, long-term and easier loans and grants, etc. So the development focus, this particular development focus, leverages also regional geographies and has various foci. So India, for example, focused on skills and development and capacity building for other countries, including, of course, giving soft loans. They have an Exim Bank, a development assistance program. China, on the other hand, focused more on infrastructure large projects, as is evident from the BRI. South Africa, for example, engaged in conflict prevention, peacekeeping, and state reconstruction. But all of them gave debt relief to the least developed countries, lowered tariffs, and for all, development cooperation was a mixture of lines of credit, concessional loans, subsidized credit, technical assistance, etc. Of course, geography played a part because In India, Brazil, and South Africa focused on the region, whereas China focused quite a bit on Africa and now even on ASEAN, Central Asia, etc. And further, South-South development assistance has also seen, has had a target that they should focus on women and MSMEs. However, this needs more focus because it was so hands-off and so non-conditional that my argument is that at least this vector needs to be made, if not conditional, at least part of a focus. And it has been in many places. For example, one argument has been that no study shows that foreign aid can transform gender relations or lessen inequality or end poverty. But there are incremental gains which can be synchronized with other policies, and these help. And in fact, if you see the Commonwealth Development Program or foreign aid, it has been readapted to the Sustainable Development Goals, especially to target women who would get at least 50% of the Commonwealth assistance programs. Now, in India, there have been some very good examples of transforming and empowering women and also linking with MSMEs, but different ones. For example, and I give some examples like the MNREGA, the Rural Employment Guarantee Act, the right to education, the Swachh Bharat, that is Clean India, cooking gas for women, and girls are receiving primary education. So these are really ideas that can be transmitted to other lesser developed countries through assistance programs. This is again, I'm reiterating my argument. Now, one such transformative method in supporting women is, of course, the micro, small, and medium enterprises as a critical vector of growth. Governments need to make this more sustainable, especially in times of crisis, of COVID-19, etc. And women-owned MSMEs make up between 30 to 36% of emerging markets, that is, of the global south. So in India, for example, just in last year, in 2019, the government of India proposed many new targets for women's entrepreneurship. These form 30% of projects under the Prime Minister Employment Generation Program. For example, according to official statistics, only about 14% of entrepreneurs in India are women. But since 2019, there is a very forced attempt to bring in more women into MSMEs. Loans are being made easier, financial assistance is being given. There's a program called TREAD, that is Trade-Related Entrepreneurship Assistance and Development, which would encourage home-based workers like women chefs, start catering, businesses, business loans, micro credit schemes, etc. I think Bangladesh has experimented with this a lot. India has a full ministry looking into it. And interestingly, there has been a very long program called the Indian Technical and Economic Cooperation Program, which funds women in development and women entrepreneurs fully funded in a big way. So every year, 2 or 3 batches are called for this kind of skill development, focusing on both women and MSMEs. So in conclusion then, just to wind up, of course, large impediments remain. These are social, patriarchal, structural, the institutional patriarchy, the insensitivity and bias against women, and the number of steeple chases that women have to cross, the hurdles women have to cross to become entrepreneurs. So there is a need from the government to be proactive in breaking these patriarchal relations, the modes of family, kinship, institutions, and state. And in times of crisis like now, COVID-19 and the economic recession, the needs and goals for encouraging women in MSMEs only increases. However, there's also need to democratize South-South cooperation, development programs, women empowerment, make it more transparent and more women and gender specific. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, Professor Chenoy, for your informative, thought-provoking presentation. about women and MSMEs in the South-South cooperation and Global South. And now I would like please to now give the talk to our second panelist, Professor Angela LYONS, who is going to share with us her expertise on challenges and opportunities for women entrepreneurs in the digital age. Would you please, Professor Angela, are you unmute your mic? I will share your presentation from my place now. I hope that you can you see the presentation?
Not yet.
So you can start the introduction,
yes,
and I will start.
Yes, as you're setting it up. So I want to thank you, Dr. Adam, and also JCGS for giving me this opportunity to talk to you all today. I understand the theme of this session is women empowerment, MSMEs, and the Global South. And what I wanted to do today, especially since this is the research session, is to focus maybe on a particular challenge that we are facing in this space, which is how the digitalization and COVID has really affected in recent months the challenges, but also maybe created some opportunities for women in this space. And so I just wanted to highlight some of the key observations that I've been making. So if we go to the next slide. Oh, okay, this is me. Okay, hello everyone. We go to the next slide. So as Dr. Adams mentioned at the beginning when she was introducing us, I serve on the T20. And as a member of the T20, I serve on a task force called the Economy, Education and Employment in the Digital Age. And we have spent a lot of time under the G20 Saudi Arabia looking at issues, especially for vulnerable populations right now, that may be particularly susceptible to challenges related to these digital divides that are coming up. And women, not surprisingly, fall into that, and especially women who own their own businesses, especially small and micro enterprises. And a lot of what is driving things from the highest level, so I'm kind of taking a big picture perspective here, that a lot of what is driving things, especially from national global agendas, is the sustainable development goals, especially in the global south. And when we're thinking about the different cooperation strategies that are trying to be developed across countries, especially South-South cooperations, we think of within this space, I've circled actually a few of these sustainable development goals that are particularly at the forefront, especially when we think about women and MSMEs. So we want to think about poverty and reducing that, hunger, so food security issues, good health and well-being, quality education, of course, gender equality, decent work and economic growth, and reducing social, economic, political, etc. inequalities. And so if we go to the next slide. So just to give you some statistics here, as we look at women and MSMEs, these numbers are coming from last year's SME Finance Forum annual report. And so we can see that MSMEs in general account for 90% of businesses worldwide, 50% of global GDP, 66% of jobs. The common issue that comes up a lot of times, though, for these businesses is that they are lacking the financing and access to credit and affordable credit. And if we take a look at that, unmet demand for credit is estimated to be 4.5 trillion. And if we look specifically at the LMICs, bank lending is only 6% of GDP. If we look particularly at women-owned businesses, they account for 23% of the MSMEs and 32% of the financing gap. With COVID, the quick and accelerated shift now to digital platforms, mobile money, all of these kinds of things. This has added just an extra layer of difficulty and complexity for female entrepreneurs. And this goes well beyond credit. So if we go to the next slide. Yes, okay. So yes, it's not changing yet. Oh, it just did. Okay. So additional challenges that I mentioned is that we see that the pandemic has accelerated the digital divides for women business owners in the global South. We also see that, especially in the work that I've been doing with the T20, that this has been a growing policy priority. And it's usually within the context of how do we improve human development and how do we reduce poverty. If any of you are following the latest statistics, World Economic Forum just this month put out some of the projections for poverty is by the end of the year, which just are horrendous. That by year's end, we're expecting that COVID-19 is going to push an additional 100 million people into extreme poverty. This means below $1.90 a day. And so we could see those living on $1.90 per day rising from 14 to 24%. And of course, women entrepreneurs are going to be particularly affected by this. They're already at risk for many of the reasons previously mentioned in the previous talk. So how can South-South cooperation assist in improving opportunities for women-owned MSMEs in the digital age? What I wanted to do in this short time is just highlight 6 of them. And so if we look at those 6, and where I think there's probably some of the biggest opportunity, especially in this new kind of digital normal, whatever normal is now. But we can look here at creating new pathways for sustainable livelihoods, improving digital access, increasing digital skills and training, improving access to and usage of digital financial services. We need to think about what we can do on the government side, and especially on the regulatory side. And then I want to end with number 6, since this is the research panel, kind of giving some food for thought for us as researchers. How can we support them from the research perspective? So let's look at number 1. Creating new pathways for sustainable livelihoods. So prior to COVID, women, we know, were already at risk. They were estimated to lose 5 jobs of every job gained, compared to men losing 3 jobs for every job gained. And we also know that women fall into sectors that are particularly vulnerable to this digital transformation. You know, we look at textiles, we look at just the service industry, healthcare, education. All of these have been highly affected by digitalization, by access, reduced access, and ability to access services by consumers, which affects the businesses owners' ability to offer their services. Also, we see that the gig economy and the gig economy and the various kinds of related platforms are springing up more rapidly. And women also are actively involved on this end. And with this has come a lot of vulnerabilities, especially in terms of worker protections. How are we going to protect workers under this kind of new kind of work environment, new setting? And so we've got to kind of deal and think about these issues, especially for women-owned MSMEs that may be transitioning to online platforms. And we always have in the background, just, you know, on top of all of these, you know, culture and social barriers that have always been there and that remain, especially for women, always having trouble accessing not only financing and things, but now with digitalization and more requirements for digital IDs and identification to access certain products and services. And I know the previous speaker mentioned some of these other issues as well. So I think under this first opportunity, where there I think where there lies a lot of key opportunities for us is to think about how can we create more holistic pathways for women-owned MSMEs that not only just addresses the business side of it and creating the business pathway, but we see so much emergence now of kind of this work-life balance and trying to create that better balance. And so how do we create a positive employment outcomes, but also educational outcomes, health outcomes, and ultimately empowerment outcomes for women in this space. Part of how we can come up with solutions for that is to think about just specifically designing products, services, and policies, especially within a digital context, that are gender-centric, and that we look at things from the woman-owned MSME perspective. And their needs are very different than other business owners, especially their male counterparts, in thinking about what they need and how those products and services can better help them to be successful. So if we look at, let's go on to opportunity number 2. Yes, I hear somebody is on. Oh, okay. So opportunity number 2, improving digital access. So this one, I think I'm not going to spend much time on it. I think it is what it is, and we kind of know this one too. But gender gaps still exist in digital access. They're quite large. If we look at the global Findex data out of the World Bank, which I have used, 33% of women have a mobile phone compared to 73% of men. Now this is getting better when we look at some more recent data, but still there is this big digital divide, especially in the global South. Also, 45% of women who don't own a mobile phone report that they're not permitted to own one by family members. So this is another kind of barrier constraint, especially if we're shifting payments and transactions that need to be conducted through mobile money. This can be a hindrance, especially if there's regulatory barriers and things like that to women accessing mobile phones and mobile technologies. It's not just about access, though, it's also about usage. And we see this particularly for women, that in the research that I've done, I've seen that women, they might have access, but they might also be limited, and more so than their male counterparts in terms of their ability to use those services and use them effectively. Number 3. So the third opportunity that I want to highlight is increasing digital skills and training. So we see the digital skills divide between men and women widening. Again, not surprising. We need digital literacy and training for women. This includes skilling, reskilling, upskilling. And the challenge here is that we have different layers within women-owned or women entrepreneurs. You know, there's those that are working at the most basic level, and maybe they have even just general literacy needs, even at the core. And so they need training just with general literacy, but then you add onto that the layer of digital literacy and trying to train them in new digital skills. But then you've also got women that are farther along and more advanced, running more sophisticated business operations. And we have to think here, what do they also need to be competitive and competitive with their male counterparts? We're talking about training in STEM programs, science, technology, engineering, and math. We're trying to think about how can we create maker spaces in their communities for women so that they can be creative in designing and building their enterprises to be competitive in this digital age. And also just can we get them hands-on experience in using coding, machine learning, robotics, and especially in these technical areas where it may be more challenging for women to get this type of training. So we've got to think about this in terms of different layers. Added onto these is human skills training, okay? It's not just about the technical skills, but that as we move towards more digitalization, we have to remember problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, innovation, leadership skills, which we always try to build into small business entrepreneurship programs and training sessions for women and young women in particular. And with this, it's really important to think about, now that we've got things in the digital setting, you know, they already had trouble accessing where the market was at and having barriers on that front. Now there's the online marketplace. How can we help them to access and to find where that online marketplace is for their businesses? How can we give them also training in the online business management tools that are now being created to do payments online or to do mobile payments, to set that up for their customers and things like that? So there's another layer there. If we go to opportunity 3, opportunity 4. We're improving access and usage to digital financial services. So here, the real issue is we're moving to a cashless economy, especially in the global south. We've got to figure out how to make it easier for women entrepreneurs to be able to use and access mobile money, mobile wallets. The focus has always been primarily on loans and financing. That still is critical. But what we're finding is that now digital financial service is going way beyond that. It's not just about bank accounts. It's not just about getting a loan. We're looking at investment opportunities now. We need risk management tools. And there's new insurance products here. There's online financial planning platforms. So a solution for this and a key opportunity is to be offering financial literacy and digital financial literacy in particular. We see at the international level, and especially in the developing world, that there's now a focus, this holistic approach again, on overall financial health, both for the personal finance side, but the business side as well, and being able to be resilient when we face these challenges. So number 5. So number 5 is expanding the government interventions and allowing for more relaxed regulation. This one is particularly important because it can do a lot right now in relaxing some of the barriers that women entrepreneurs are facing. And if we look particularly, we still have connectivity issues and physical infrastructure, which everyone's facing. This isn't just a gender issue, it's an overall issue. But then you add onto it the layer of digital identification, which can be a challenge for women. Worker protections, which we know has there's gender inequality in that, and with the gig economy that we talked about before, that adds another layer of complexity. We need to continue pushing with investment and financing. There's a lot of small businesses that are not going to survive out of this, and we need to think about new ways for financing and raising financing in this space. Also, women don't have equal access to information. There's still a lot of information asymmetries. And so how can governments better set up platforms, websites, apps and things where they can find out where government resources are that supports the small businesses, small business programs, grant programs, funding programs at the government level. And then we also need to think about protection, not just from the consumer protection side, but from the business owner protection side. Women are particularly susceptible to scams right now in the digital age, particularly susceptible to data privacy issues, cybersecurity issues. We need to think about the risk management strategies that may be particular to women in this space. And ultimately, we might need to, there's a lot of discussions going on, especially for business owners in general, but do we need to open up discussions about UBI, Universal Basic Income, and what does that mean for women versus maybe men who may be particularly more susceptible? Number 6. Okay, so this comes to the research part of it, okay? What specifically can researchers do now to support these efforts of the Global South to improve these opportunities for women-owned MSMEs in the digital age? So I gave you 5 where there's always something behind the scenes that as researchers we can do. And so what's one big way, you know, if I had to pick one kind of item for us to focus on right now, I think we can really help out the South-South cooperation with governments, public-private sector partnerships, by helping them to just collect some data, to be able to back up the things that they want to do, and to be able to identify how big of a problem is this. Which women in particular are the most vulnerable right now. We can help them by setting some metrics. What are some goals that we should be working towards? And there can be cross-country collaboration on this, or maybe regional collaboration if we've got the Latin America versus, you know, the Southeast Asia kind of component. And how can we measure it? And how can we define it? Because data really is power in being able to track and see the progress that we're making. Also, we don't have very good gender disaggregated data. As researchers, we can really make a contribution there in trying to do more tracking of some of these women business owners and what their outcomes are, how they're faring and doing during COVID. And trying to focus and get some micro level data to better understand their needs, the challenges that they're facing, so that policymakers and public-private sector stakeholders can use that to make smarter, more informed decisions from their perspective. Also, we need to move beyond descriptive analysis. As I don't know how many of you on here what your field or background is. I'm an economist by training, but I'm very interdisciplinary. But I think we can bring our toolbox to this table and help to develop more predictive models that have causal power to help kind of say, you know, which women are most likely to fall into poverty. Can we predict that out? And what interventions from even a behavioral economic standpoint, what behavioral interventions may be most effective in helping to pull them out or to avoid that pitfall, to help them have a better chance at their business surviving. I think through our modeling, we can help to inform those kinds of discussions. And as researchers, I think it's really important. I myself have had to do this in the last year, reskilling and upskilling of ourselves. We need to be thinking about design thinking. How does our research translate to what kinds of products and services need to be designed in the real world from a gender-centric viewpoint to address some of the challenges that I've previously mentioned? Behavioral science, data science, predictive analytics, all of these are important. And then I think we're here at the end. What is the next slide? Yes, okay. So Dhanyavad, I'm very grateful to have been able to just share a few different perspectives here, and I welcome the opportunity for discussion here in a little bit. So thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Angela, for sharing with us this illuminating presentation on challenges and the opportunity in the digital age that women entrepreneurs are facing. So now I would like to call Professor Ashraf to share with us his expert opinion on the role of entrepreneurship in MSMEs development, and he's going to share with us examples from Egypt. So I'm giving to you the talk now, Professor Ashraf. I am seeing that you have already shared. Yes.
Thank you, Dr. Heba. Can you see the presentation?
Yes, it is clear, but would you please make it in full screen?
Okay, that's it. Okay?
Yes,
okay. I will have a little bit of a different approach. So I will give you some sort of a context about what's happening in Egypt from an MSME perspective, as well as entrepreneurship perspective, which is my specialty since 2006, maybe, when we started the quest for entrepreneurship. Just to give you an idea, I'm not an academic by nature. I was an entrepreneur and working in family business for 31 years in textiles. and then I got my dissertation, doctorate dissertation in knowledge management, and then I started my academic career. So the approach might be a little bit different. Okay, so let me start by giving you some sort of an idea, and I will stick to the 12 minutes allocated for me. It is the national profile of Egypt. Just to give you an idea, we have a population of around 102 million people at mid-year, according to UN data, which makes us, in Egypt, we have the largest population amongst the Arab countries, and most of them are living around 6% of the whole area of Egypt. And I want to tell you why I'm mentioning this, but later on. Another issue is that we have around 26 or 27 million of labor force combined between women and men. Okay, so we have 27 million amongst the 102 million are representing the labor force in Egypt. Another issue that now, as you can see here, after what happened with COVID-19, we have around 9.6 unemployment rate in July 2020, which is representing a clear and present danger for the whole country. If you can see what is happening with the trend here, in Jan we were 7.7, and now we are talking about in July 2020 around 9.6%. And this is affecting the economy of Egypt dramatically on either women or men as well. One of the things that I want to mention that the female labor force participation represents about 22%. Now we can say that it has reached around 23% according to the latest surveys. But can you hear me, please? Shall I go on? Okay. 23% is considerably a very limited percentage of the whole labor force in Egypt. One of the issues that we have around 50 or 49 million or 50 million of the whole population are females, and around 50 or 51 are males, which tell us that the population is separated into two halves. The problem, or one of the main issues that needs to be discussed also, and it is related to entrepreneurship as well, that we have around 60 or 61% of the whole population between the age of 15 to 64 years. And if you dig deeper, you will find that around 50% are between the age of 20 to 40 years old, which gives us an idea that the country is a young country and it is ripe for entrepreneurship who are going to develop MSME as micro, small, and medium enterprises. So this is just a beginning. Another idea that attracted my attention that I wanted to mention, since coming back from a textile background, is that there were a lot of definitions related to MSMEs. So in order to analyze the problem or analyze the situation and come to conclusion, we want to have a finite definition. So I have chosen the definition mentioned by the Ministry of Industry and Trade in Egypt, which tell us that micro enterprises, we are talking about 1 to 4 workers, small enterprises 5 to 14, and medium we are talking about 15 to 49 workers. I'm telling that, and I'm also not that convinced, because it differs from one industry to another. But we will try to normalize the curve, so we will relate to the numbers of employees. Okay, why is it important for the Egyptians to understand about MSMEs or to have MSMEs? With such a large density of population, with such a relative high number of population in Egypt, we found that according to statistics, we have around 3.6 micro, small, and medium enterprise in Egypt, 3.65 million. And I'm talking ranging from a kiosk where someone is selling beverage or food or something, or a lady who's sitting at the market and selling some sort of cheese or poultry or whatever. And I'm not that sure about this number, of course, but this is an average number. It is managing or administering or staffing around 9.7 million, which is representing around 33% of the total labor force in Egypt. Another issue is that the salaries they pay is around 119.2 billion Egyptian pounds. And to give you an idea, 119 livres Egyptiennes or Egyptian pounds, the Egyptian pound is around 4.67 rupees. So this is considerably a large amount. And it gives 1.237 Egyptian pounds a trillion output as an output. So this tells us that for the Egyptian economy, it's really important to address the MSMEs issues. Now we go to the idea of we need to know that there must be some sort of an entrepreneurial ecosystem that can support the growth of MSMEs. Okay, so what is happening? The ecosystem in Egypt, and this is happening around the world, is mainly concerned about education, funding, support, and awareness. Going back to where we started in 2006, and I was part of this initiative or this quest for entrepreneurship, which started 2006, 2005, something like that, when I was still a businessman in textiles. We have gone through the awareness and we have surpassed this idea, and it is still there, of course. This was followed later on by the other three aspects: education, funding, and support. This was really individual initiatives to give an idea that entrepreneurship is some sort of an important issue for the Egyptian economy, especially taking into consideration that out of the 27 million citizens in the labor force, we have around nine working for the government with contract or on fixed term employees working in the government. So this tells us that there is a lot of importance related to MSMEs. And those 9 million, which represents around 25% of the labor force, are not supposed to pursue their careers within the government anymore. They cannot bear it anymore. We are changing from being a semi-socialist society to some sort of a free market economy. Okay. The main authority that is tackling the MSMEs in Egypt is some sort of an authority that was established 3 or 4 years ago, and it is called MSMEDA. This is the abbreviation and the title in Arabic. This was followed by another authority which was under the name of Social Fund for Development, and it was not mainly addressing micro, and I cannot say even small, but also medium, but mainly medium enterprises. So this is from the government side. What is following is that for the educational side, we have started several programs at several entities. For example, the American University in Cairo started its entrepreneurship program and education maybe years and years ago. It was on 2009 or 2010. And this was followed up later on by several other universities, including Cairo University, Faculty of Commerce, maybe Ain Shams University, and so on and so forth. So the idea of education or entrepreneurship education is prevailing nowadays in the different universities in Egypt. But it started not with a formal course, but it started with some sort of training or programs that was done as an extracurricular program outside of the main courses within the university. Then this was followed by, in parallel, we had some programs from Microsoft, Intel, UNIDO, and from ILO, they have a program called Know About Business, and from Injaz Egypt, and from other non-governmental organizations. And I was the president of this organization for some time. It's called the Middle East Council for Small Business and Entrepreneurship. It's an affiliate for an organization in the USA called the International Council for Small Business, and it's managed in George Washington University. So they provided a lot of trainings. They provided a lot of programs. In fact, they have surpassed this into providing some sort of toolkits and some sort of courses, written courses for different citizens. And later on, the idea got more and more deepened to the extent that we now have a complete curriculum for students who are working, who are enlisted in the vocational training. We have around 2 million students listed in vocational training in Egypt, and I'm talking about the secondary schools in vocational training. And we have a large number of students working in productivity and vocational training department. And I was personally involved in developing an innovation and entrepreneurship curriculum for these institutes. So nowadays, we have moved from awareness to an official curriculum enlisted, whether in the higher education or in the vocational training or in an unofficial programs that is happening all over Egypt. To complete the idea, nowadays, the ecosystem of entrepreneurship includes competitions. We have summits every year. We have competitions. We have weeks, and we have a lot of other conferences related to entrepreneurship in particular. We have a startup weekend. We have I Beat Car. We have summit in Alexandria. We have conferences and competitions all over Egypt, including Nawa, which is supported by the ILO. We have several, nowadays we have a lot of companies that evolved according to, in response to what is happening in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We have several companies that evolved. Some of them was established from the AUC. For example, this company is worth about 300 million Egyptian pounds nowadays, okay? But the issue is we have some issues related to funding entrepreneurship. We are mainly depending on governmental funding, okay? But to have an ecosystem which includes venture capitalists, which includes entrepreneurial angel or angel investors, it is still lacking a lot of momentum. Another issue, we have some sort of incubators. We have accelerators in Egypt, including we have an accelerator and incubator at the AUC. We have several initiatives. Maybe this is one of the Egypt Innovate or TIC. It's related to the Ministry of Information and Technology. The problem is, and I want to leave it open, the problem is how to relate the entrepreneurial efforts that is on the move for the time being to the MSMEs. The idea is that the relation is not only about entrepreneurship, it's also about entrepreneurial skills, which is a main dominant factor in this. We have MSMEs The problem is nowadays, from my own point of view, that there is a lot of initiatives that are not only tracking entrepreneurs with high income, but there is a need to go into more of grassroots entrepreneurship. And I have seen a question from one of your colleagues, or a comment about entrepreneurship in Upper Egypt. In Upper Egypt, it's to the southern part of Cairo. We have several initiatives, and the model that relates entrepreneurship and MSMEs is that we provide entrepreneurial acceleration or mentorship or coaching and so on, and supervision in order to help MSMEs to develop. So where is the link? The link is always through NGOs in Egypt. And the NGOs are always funded by several entities. For example, the British Council is doing a great job in Upper Egypt. For example, the UNIDO, which is part of the United Nations authorities, is doing a great job in Egypt, especially for women. And I'm talking about special programs for women. And we have other programs that is funded mainly by ILO, USAID, including SEED program. We have Know About Business. We have programs that has been completely customized for women in the eastern part in Egypt, in Sinai, and in places near the Red Sea. I do not want to extend to theoretical issues. I want to go to practicalities. So I will leave some time. I think I did not exceed the 12 minutes allocated. So I will leave some time to talk about the practical implementation and the practical ramifications of linking entrepreneurship to MSMEs and what is happening within the Egyptian context. So I will leave it for you to conduct some question, and I will have some comments. And thank you for hosting me. Thank you, Dr. Heba.
Thank you so much, Professor Ashraf, for sharing with us this informative presentation about MSMEs development in Egypt. And as I have seen in comments of Dr. Angela, she was she did like to know about the Egyptian experience from you and the Indian experience from Professor Chenoy. So, and I am happy that the participants have known about the Egyptian experience today through you. So now I have seen also in the chat box, Dr. Angela was an active panelist, and she has answered the questions. One of the questions that has been imposed by Firdos. There is another question here that is addressed to Professor Chenoy. So Abhijit is asking Professor Chenoy, is the growth of women MSMEs in India is in India uneven, where in the south is performing better than the north, and also are women's entrepreneurial activities significantly varied across the form of women enterprises and the nature of activity. Professor Chenoy, are you getting that question?
Yes, I saw that question, and I think he's absolutely right. There is a great variation. It also, there is a kind of an organic link between the empowerment of women and their relations to MSMEs. Of course, in the South, especially, for example, in states like Kerala, which have a long tradition of women working as professionals, nurses all over the world, out in the field, and there's an infrastructure for childcare, etc. You will find in many of the states of the South, women in medium and small scale enterprises. In the North, very often you do see, things like women vendors or women in craft, in textiles, in But it hasn't become an enterprise as such. They are women workers. They work for others and they may be working for other women. So this idea really has to move down so that at the grassroots level, as was said by my co-panelist really, that it will be successful if it is at various levels. At the moment, it is more successful where it is in the medium level and it gets recognized by the government and by others, and they have the ability to move into the social media space, advertise, etc. But at the lower levels, at really small scale, that it varies and it needs a lot of push really from civil society, from universities, policymakers and governments. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Professor Chenoy. There is a question for you, Dr. Ashraf. It is about
Yes.
Egypt, how inclusive entrepreneurial programs in Egypt, and what contribution of the MSME program since 2005 in the development of enterprises.
Okay. This is a judgmental question, so I will mention my opinion, okay? So it differs from one place, geographical place to another. For example, one of the participants asked about what is happening in Upper Egypt. In Upper Egypt, we are mainly concerned, or we should be concerned about including women in MSMEs, because the percentage of women working in Upper Egypt, working officially, is very low. And the idea is that we are mainly in Upper Egypt addressing grassroots entrepreneurship. So there is a different, and we are mainly talking about agricultural society. So part of the programs are mainly customized. I cannot say inclusive. Part of the programs are mainly for women. Another section of the programs are mainly customized for industries. In fact, we have developed some sort of an industrial map for Egypt that has been there for 2 years. So we are working according to the industrial map that was developed by the Ministry of Trade and Industry. The problems or the needs for women in Upper Egypt might be a little bit different than problems or needs for women in the Red Sea or in northern side of Egypt. So there is a need to customize programs, and I'm talking and I'm stressing on the fact there is a need to customize programs, especially for grassroots women entrepreneurs. As mentioned by my colleague, we are mainly doing some sort of propaganda for people who are establishing businesses, and they are getting into what we call unicorn phase, and they have done millions and millions of Egyptian pounds. And to an extent, we do not highlight women who are working as grassroots entrepreneurs. So there is a need to address this point, especially that nowadays there is some sort of a growing interest from the government, even in education. We were explicitly, it was explicitly mentioned by the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Trade and Industry. We want to increase the percentage of women entrepreneurs, which is representing only 22% of the whole entrepreneurs in Egypt. So you can imagine about 22% only. We want to increase their presence to a larger percent. And if I'm talking about grassroots women entrepreneurs, it's even less. So there is an urgent need to do something about this. But I want to tell you something. We are, to a great extent, inclusive, and it includes minorities, women, and so on. And in fact, we have special programs for women nowadays. Yes. I hope that I was able to answer that question.
Yes, yes, of course, Dr. Ashraf. Sharmishta is asking a question for you, Professor LYONS. So she's asking, would you occur the financing gap for women-led MSMEs largely to credit lenders? Lack of willingness. Are you getting her question? She's long question.
So I think what she's trying to ask
Effect
here is just essentially, do we think that the gap is primarily being driven by lack of access to credit and financing for women entrepreneurs? And yes, it is. It is largely being driven by lack of funding, but there are, as I mentioned, a couple other big driving forces that there's just still some cultural, social, political, regulatory issues that, if they could really be relaxed right now, could help to at least improve access. But that is each country's kind of decision on this end. But there could be some cooperation among countries in trying to set some sort of goals or agreement to set some sort of goals to improve it. This is where metrics can come into play. But also, one point that I had on my slides, but because of time, I kind of skipped over, but it's becoming increasingly important. So in financial inclusion space, there was so much push the last decade to get women, taking this outside of the business context, but just to get women in general bank accounts and get them connected, like even like in India, the big push to get every household a bank account. So much emphasis was placed on accounts and borrowing through formal methods instead of informal methods, because there was a lot of predatory lending practices and things going on in that space. However, what digitalization has done right now has actually opened our eyes to the fact that the informal markets are still really important, especially for women entrepreneurs. You take the case of India with the self-help groups and things, and some of the financing structure where there's pooled resources that can be shared within communities to help entrepreneurs. This is at kind of maybe the lower level of when you really think about the micro kinds of enterprises, but being able to survive during this time. I think that what we're seeing is that the digitalization has just put the spotlight and emphasis back on them and how critical they are right now at this moment. And the other interesting trend that we're seeing is how banks are teaming up now with fintech companies. And the fintech companies are offering some new and innovative financing kinds of tools and platforms, and kind of helping us to move beyond kind of the crowdfunding model, but offering some different ways that maybe banks haven't thought about in the past to open up some opportunities. But I have to say, I am very worried in the next 6 to 12 months for women entrepreneurs, especially as we see the numbers rising around the globe again with COVID-19. I worry very much for India, and particular parts in the rural areas, because the bottom line is that when you don't have connectivity, you still have infrastructure issues that make it difficult to use your mobile phones and to have access to cheap, affordable mobile phones when everything has gone digital in terms of payment structures, being able to make purchases and to do those kinds of digital transactions. This also is something that's very worrying me, in addition to the financing. So I don't know if the other panelists, maybe they have like the Egypt perspective on this, or even Dr. Chenoy, maybe you have a different perspective. I mean, you're there, so.
No, I think I agree.
Good evening, ma'am.
I agree with what you're saying. It has become difficult, and the next few months are really critical. And this is a time when governments need to step in and link with people who are having these difficulties, because the informal structures of finance are very exploitative.
Would you like to add something, Dr. Ashraf, to this point?
Yeah, please repeat again, please.
I think I'd just be curious to get your thoughts about what do you think the financing gap is kind of the biggest challenge right now for women, yes, MSMEs, especially in Egypt, versus some of the digital challenges they may be facing, especially during this critical time for them?
To be honest, Angela, coming from a practical background again, and I want to tell you where I come from.
Yes.
I cannot see that this is a problem. The problem is the mindset. How can you be entrepreneurial when you do not have an entrepreneurial mindset? The people who are addressing women, for example, and I can claim that because I have seen it. For example, you have a big conference about entrepreneurship without entrepreneurs, okay? And the people who are mainly addressing women in Egypt, I can claim that they do not, some of them do not know the particularity of each woman. They do not know the problem, the grassroots. So it's a matter of knowledge. It's not a matter of finance. It's a matter of knowledge. What are the social or the sociological issues related to? And I have seen, for example, something related that I always remember, the book by C.K. Prahalad. It was Fortune at the Bottom of the Pyramids. Maybe some of you have read this seminal book.
I have read this.
And it was about the Indian society and how these people were able to surpass this issue and to market or say do some sort of sales for Hindustan Lever Company. And it was brilliant and it was very easy. The problem is not about finance, it's not about education, but it's mainly about knowledge. It's about knowing the grassroots main issues.
But I think we have to be careful here. I think we have to be a little bit careful here, though, because maybe this is case of Egypt, but for India, financing is very hard to come by, regardless of gender.
I cannot say that finance is not a problem. Of course, it is a problem, and it will be a problem within COVID-19. But coming from a knowledge management point of view, how can you serve someone when you do not know as much about him? Okay, so it's a matter of communication. We think, or at least from my perspective, we think that we know. I'm a consultant, so I think that I know. But I cannot know until I see and live. We touch upon things superficially. So what about the need for a woman who's living in a village in Asyut, southern of Egypt, and you are trying to teach her about business models and so on, which is really nice, okay? But what about when she goes back home and she has some sort of an encounter with someone from the government who's trying to do some red tape or to create barriers? These are the things, practicality, going from theory to implementation. I believe this is a very important issue. I don't know about the case.
Yes. So you're talking like about like the business literacy, financial literacy kind of aspect. I agree with you on that. I do feel like there needs to be digital literacy on this and added to those kinds of programs, which I'm guessing in India you guys have been adding to the curriculum, right?
Yes, we have done that, but the issue is that Angela, we do not complete the cycle. We do the training, we do the consultancy, and leave everyone to go ahead, and we do not know what is the return on investment, what is the return on training, what is the return of the consultancy. And I do not know, but this is the issue in Egypt. What are the outcomes? We have done some sort of outputs, and that's it. We commanded 100 workshops, bye-bye. So what happened later on?
Yes. This is the big challenge that we're all facing.
I cannot say. Maybe in India, they have an experience about that. No tracking, no impact assessment.
Yes. But it's so costly. I mean, it's so costly, labor intensive. It's hard to follow them. They move around a lot. So I can totally understand these kinds of challenges and difficulties. So,
but it's a challenge, but it is solvable. We direct all of our finance to workshops and trainings and consultancies. Okay, but what about after what you call in economics
the follow-up,
the follow-up ex post facto. Okay, what will happen later on? We do not have a track for this.
And you don't know, you also don't know, because the challenge we face when we do have the data is you can't isolate the effect. How do you know it was really because of that program and not other factors or dynamics that were going on in that area, or other programs that they could have participated that also affected the impact? So this is the challenge too.
I guess, Leon, we do not think in systems. We think that we can develop MSMEs and entrepreneurship, disregarding the rest of the system, whether it is political, whether it is legal, whether it is technological. You have to think at the whole system in order to develop something.
Yes.
We call it system thinking. If you know about Peter Senge, we do not think in systems. We just take the outputs. I'm talking about the Egyptian case. I'm not generalizing. We just take the output, go in front of the camera, and tell we have done so and so and so. I'm not being politicized here, but I'm just mentioning that we are really concerned about the outputs. But what about the outcomes?
Yes, I think we all want to know. Thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate this exchange. I learned a lot about the case of Egypt here, so thank you.
Thank you.
Dr. Angela and Ashraf and Dr. Chenoy. Please, we are having one hand that is raised, Firdos Malik. So you are having a question or comment to say?
Yes, hello.
Yes.
Am I audible? Hello.
Yes, you are audible. Please go ahead. Your voice, voice is not clear. You are having a problem at your end. So now let's end up this inside. I don't like to end it up. I really like personally our meeting today, but so we'll end up our session for today. Please, our panelists, they are going to share their contacts with you if you are having still questions. So they are almost welcome to get your questions. Don't worry about your more questions that you do have. So to summarize the key points that have been discussed today, so we have learned that it is really crucial to work on closing gaps in education, labor market, financial and digital inclusion, and accelerating women empowerment in the southern countries. And it is important to reinforce and promote South-South cooperation and knowledge sharing as relevant platforms to accelerate women empowerment, inclusion, and gender equality in the global South. So I would like to, before ending, of course, this thought-provoking session, this wonderful session that we had today, I would like to send a special vote of thanks to our today's eminent guest speakers, Professor Anuradha Chenoy, the former Dean at School of International Studies, Jawaharlal Nehru University in New Delhi, Professor Angela LYONS, Professor and Director of the Center for Economic and Financial Education in the University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign in the USA, and at last not least, Professor Ashraf Sheta, the Visiting Assistant Professor for Entrepreneurship, Management and Innovation at the American University in Cairo.